I just wanted to thank you all for having me here. It was such a pleasure to fly to this university. I have to say that, I don't think I would have been accepted to this school when I started as a journalist many years ago. You guys are all way ahead of the curve. I wasn't that smart, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I did know that I was extremely curious. And that I really wanted to find the truth, and that I just wanted to know everything. I was that person that didn't stop asking the questions when the teacher told me to stop, or when my mom told me just because. So I kept going, which makes for the best tools to be a journalist. You ask questions and you keep asking, and you don't stop asking until you get an answer that is the truth, or that is correct, or that is right. And that's something that I've had the luxury and the pleasure and the honor of being able to do at 60 Minutes. So thank you for letting me talk to you a bit today. I did a little bit of research on the Missouri School of Journalism, and I learned that this is the oldest, well, one of the oldest formal journalism institutions in the world, founded in 1908. The only other university before that was in France. So you really are at the best of the best, and the world needs the best right now more than ever. So another thing that I realized is that there is something in this program called the Missouri Method. It's a method that I believe all of you should make sure you practice every day, and it's something that I shall implement in my work as I do it. I'm hoping you guys may accept me into the university after I do the speech, so this is also an application request. So, journalism is rapidly changing, and there are more outlets for news and stories than ever before, and our roles as journalists have never been more vital in these changing times. Facebook, Twitter, there's a groundswell of false information masquerading as journalism on sites like these. And as these outlets continue to evolve and change, so does the job that we need to do. Nothing can replace fact-based journalism. And at times, especially now, it becomes harder and harder to do that. It takes more time, it takes more work, it takes more money. But finding the truth as journalists, it's not always easy, but that's the point. Journalism isn't supposed to be easy. That's why we do it. Which leads me to wanting to show you a story that I did a few years ago called A Crime Against Humanity. In the early hours of August 21st, 2013, two suburbs around Damascus, Syria, were struck by rockets containing a chemical weapon agent called sarin. 1,429 civilians were killed, including 426 children. That attack became the deadliest use of chemical weapons since the Iran-Iraq War in decades. In the direct aftermath of this attack, there were a lot of reporting, and then it faded away as news headlines do these days. They're replaced very quickly with other ones. My colleagues and I were monitoring the UN and the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, work to remove chemical weapons from Syria. But as we researched the story, we were continually haunted by the attack that happened. Now, this is a year later, which sparked this work in the US-Russian diplomatic agreement to destroy the chemical weapons. The images of the women and the children were more compelling to me than trying to get rid of these chemical weapons. Children convulsing and gasping for air stuck with us, and so we shifted our focus from the removal of these weapons and the removal of this process to the people, to the faces, and to those who died, who didn't have any justice served for them. So we started our own investigation. And we knew we weren't the first to cover the story, but we knew we needed to be the best, or the most truthful, or to dig a lot deeper than anybody had ever done. And we had no idea how we were going to begin or where we were going to start. So this is the story that we did, and after you watch it, I'll give you an insight on how we tried to get to the bottom of the truth.
If you have young children watching right now, usually that's a good thing, but this story is not for them. The pictures you're about to see are agonizing. This will be hard to watch, but it should be seen. Generally, mankind does not outlaw weapons. Anything a military can think of is in the arsenals of the world. But there are a few exceptions, and one of them is for a weapon so hideous that virtually every country has banned not only its use, but the mere possession of it. The weapon is sarin. It's nerve gas. And in 2013, it was unleashed on Syrian civilians in what the UN Secretary General calls a crime against humanity. A year and a half later, no one has been held responsible. For several months, we've been gathering evidence. Much of what you're about to see has not been public before. None of what we found will be omitted here.
The story will continue in a moment.
About 2 in the morning, August 21st, 2013. Hundreds in the suburbs of Damascus were awakened by the panic of their last breath stuck in their throats. Neighbors carried neighbors to makeshift clinics. Victims were stripped and washed. Everything was tried, but nothing could be done. There was no forcing life into lungs that could not accept it. Their nerves, electrified by sarin, fired non-stop. Muscles seized until death released them.
Nobody knew what was going on. People were just praying for God to have mercy on them. Sir, I've seen things you won't even dream about in your worst nightmares.
I'm in a tour inside the streets of Muaddamiyah.
Qasim Eid has recorded his nightmares in Muaddamiyah. 4 years ago, the suburb rebelled against the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad. Eid has shown the world the shelling and years of hunger imposed by an army blockade.
That was a close one.
He was there in August when strange rockets pummeled the night.
When they crashed, they didn't make the same old-fashioned bombing sound, but it was, in a way, silent.
The rockets hit the ground, but it didn't sound to you like they were exploding.
Yes, didn't sound like it was. They were exploding. With the closest rocket hit almost 100 meters away from the place that I was staying in.
300 feet or so.
Yes, and within seconds, it just took seconds before I lost my ability to breathe. I felt like my chest was set on fire. My eyes were burning like hell. I wasn't able even to scream or to do anything, so I started to beat my chest really hard.
Beat your chest?
Yes, trying to take a breath, just to be able to take a single breath. It was so painful. It felt like somebody was tearing up my chest with a knife made of fire.
Over the years, artillery had sheared the tops off the neighborhoods, so women and children slept in basements. Sarin is heavier than air. It slipped past doors and crept down stairwells. Death was arbitrary. It seemed that for every corpse there was a witness who just missed a lethal dose. A neighbor appeared at Qasim Eid's door.
And she had 2 of her kids suffocating and vomiting this weird white stuff out of their mouths. She was begging us to help her, to get her children to the field hospital. This field hospital is just a basement in a building with almost zero medical equipment.
It's not a real hospital.
It's not a real hospital. It felt like Judgment Day for me.
Sarin has no color, no odor. Often the dead drop, never knowing what happened. But their eyes bear witness. The seizures draw the pupils tight, and the world goes dark, which might be a blessing. This father had willed his daughters through months of hunger. Now he's shouting, "Do you know what they said before going to sleep? I gave her food. She said, 'Dad, it's not my turn to eat, it's my sister's.'" He goes on, What should we do, good people? What are we to do? Look at that face. Look at that face.
You were being exterminated.
I don't know. I cannot imagine how anybody can do this to people, to other people. Dying this way is one of the most ugliest ways of death people ever knew through history.
The history of sarin begins in the 1930s. It was a Nazi weapons program. The name is an acronym of the scientists' last names. In 1997, sarin and other chemical weapons were outlawed, and the world set up the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Scott Carnes is a chemist and lead inspector for that organization.
A person who is exposed to sarin, what do they experience?
A number of physical symptoms and some psychological effects. You get this overwhelming sense of doom and hopelessness and fear.
And what causes death?
Typically, it's the paralysis of the respiratory system eventually. Your muscles don't work. You lose the oxygen to your brain. It just puts you into overload. It's a very horrible way to die.
As fate would have it, Scott Carnes would see evidence of that for himself. He was in Damascus with a team the day of the assault. They'd arrived days before to investigate other alleged chemical attacks.
I had just gotten up, and what I thought I had heard was another regular bombardment of conventional weapons to the east of Damascus.
He had heard the rockets en route to the largest sarin massacre of civilians since Saddam Hussein in Iraq in 1988. Carnes demanded access. They raced in UN trucks, and the shooting started.
What happened?
The gunman was firing on the first two vehicles.
So the vehicles were hit?
Oh, the vehicles were hit. The first vehicle was disabled.
Did you find out who was shooting at you?
No.
Why do you think they were shooting at you?
They were shooting at us just to tell us, send us a message. If they wanted to kill us, they would have killed us. At no point was there any interest in turning around and going back to the hotel.
Finding and documenting the truth was worth risking your life for.
Yes.
Thank you for your coming, okay? Thank you a lot.
How'd you go about your work?
Very quickly. We didn't have a lot of time. We had places where we could set up our interview stations. We could take samples, biomedical samples from people, blood, urine, hair.
They also collected cell phone videos and swabbed samples from mangled rockets. Days later, in a community called Zamalka, they discovered the rockets were much larger and had delivered even more gas. Never before had investigators arrived at a chemical crime scene so soon.
Well over 90% of the samples that we took tested positive for sarin.
What witness sticks in your mind as the person you cannot forget?
There are several. A child of 7 or 8 who lost most of his family. A woman of in her early 30s who lost her entire family, her husband and all her kids. A man, out of his 20 family members, he was the only one left alive. So interviewing these people was very difficult.
Our work to find witnesses took us out into the desert. The refugees we found were on the run from the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Millions of Syrians have fled the country into desolate refugee camps like this one. And over a period of weeks, we have been able to find more survivors of the nerve gas attack. These people asked us not to show you their faces or tell you their names, because they have family back in Syria and they are quite certain the dictatorship would hunt them down. Even at that, they told us, some risks have to be taken to tell this story. This man told us, Assad gassed people, he killed people, he's killing women. What he did could not be done by any other human being. He killed everything, even the trees. He and his son, who was a nurse, told us that they were among those who had given first aid. How many patients did you treat that day? He told us people were being brought in on ambulances, motorcycles, pickup trucks, a tractor, and a semi. There were people rushing in with their kids, crying out, help him, he's about to die. I didn't have a chance to count. This woman was 3 months pregnant with her son when the gas entered her lungs. She came to in an aid station. Her brother was carried in next. He was calling my name before he died, she said. Take care of your mother, he told me.
How did you survive?
I lived by God's will, but I wished I had died. Her son was born 6 months later. She believes he has epilepsy. He loses consciousness. He starts shaking. His mouth foams. The same symptoms I had.
How often does he have these seizures?
She told us approximately 3 a day. The rockets were types used by the Syrian army, and they were launched from land held by the dictatorship. U.S. intelligence believes the Syrian army used sarin in frustration after years of shelling and hunger failed to break the rebels. With the threat of airstrikes, President Obama forced Assad to give up his chemical arsenal. But if Assad was the triggerman, there is one thing odd about the timing.
Why would anyone launch the largest chemical weapons attack in decades while chemical weapons inspectors are in town?
I ask myself that a lot. I don't know.
We don't know why.
No. I don't think we'll ever truly know.
We also don't know precisely how many died. But have a look around the makeshift morgues. So many were lost all at once that the living had to make room for the dead. U.S. intelligence estimates 1,429 civilians were killed, 426 of them children. Of course, Syria is dying too. Prosecution of this atrocity will have to wait for whatever civilization emerges from the ruin. But the dead will be waiting, because a crime buried without justice is never laid to rest.
It took us about 1.5 years to complete our investigation. And we knew it wasn't our job to be first. It was our job to find the truth and to report it. I've had the honor of working with Scott Pelley, anchor and managing editor of the CBS Evening News and longtime 60 Minutes correspondent for almost 15 years. He recently received the prestigious Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism from the Arizona State University. And in his acceptance speech, he said, "I suggest to you today that the quickest, most direct way to ruin a democracy is to poison the information. Those are the stakes that we have to address. It's no longer legacy media versus new media now. The dividing line in the media is the difference between journalism and junk. Today, this responsibility that we own as truth seekers has never been more important. And so this symposium asks us, what is right? And what do we own? For me, what is right is finding and seeking the truth. And what we own is the responsibility to do that. So I now ask the question to all of you, what is right and what do you own? And if you're hunting for the truth, I'm sure you'll find the answers. So thank you and enjoy this great event.
So we have a little extra time in TV terms, and so will you stay up here and we'll go around and we'll anybody questions, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone around to you. I have a question, but I'm gonna wait because Randy has his arm up, and so we're gonna start with you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Nicole, it seems like, trying to decide whether to distribute that footage is something that is going to become more common in newsrooms because there's more of that user-generated content.
Yeah.
Have you guys come up with any new ways to approach the content that's out there? How to, you described the different ways you vetted this particular piece. It took 1.5 years, but it seems like you can't do that all the time.
Well, one of the things I have to say particularly about the Syrian crisis is that it's the most well-documented crisis on the planet. And so what you have is more information than you have facts behind that information. And so I think in regard to covering the Syrian crisis, a lot of it has been a learning curve for even us. This was something where we had to create, how do we figure out how to verify exactly what you're seeing? And we needed to kind of just start with ideas. And so is there a system in place at the moment? Maybe we've kind of created one by starting this. I didn't realize that to prove thousands and thousands and thousands of different uploads and cell phone footage would mean speaking to munitions experts. But that was something that we figured out. We created that as a method of saying, okay, is the munition that we see on the ground exactly what it is? And then from there we say, well, yes, it is. So then we say, well, can this munition carry sarin? So then then they said, well, it could potentially. So then we had to go even further. Well, what exactly is sarin? And something in the piece that you don't see, sarin is the acronym of the last names of the men who created it in World War II. That's where sarin came from. It sounds awful and evil, but that's where it came from. And so then we had to ask even further, well, the ingredients that you need to make sarin. And so you keep asking more questions. The more questions you ask offer the more solutions on where you need to go. So then we had to figure out, well, who's an expert in sarin? It's a chemical that's so rarely created and that is so purposefully created. Just to get the ingredients to make it is so hard. So what are the countries that actually allow you to sell the ingredients to create sarin? So then we had to go there. And it evolved, and you had to keep going until you ran out of stops for questions. And that sometimes will never end, depending on the crisis. So in figuring out how to verify footage, I still think the most basic form of journalism is the best way to do it. And that is a pen, a paper, and eye-to-eye contact. I think you cannot use Google for fact-finding. You can use it to give you information, you can use it to help you move you forward, but it is not a source. The only person who should be your source is your pen, your paper, and your journalistic ethic.
I have 2 questions for you.
Absolutely.
And we talked on the phone leading up to this, and we talked about the fact that, about not being first.
Yeah.
But we also talked about trust, and we talked about a relationship with user or viewer or listener or whomever that audience looks like. My question for you is the CBS Evening News and 60 Minutes. I mean, clearly you don't have a problem with eyeballs on 60 Minutes. It's the most watched show in America. But news is in crisis. Truth is in crisis, to your point, and the relationship is in crisis with not just people who never did trust the media, but now with people who once felt that they trusted the media who don't. And so I'm going to ask you a more philosophical question as we talk about what we own and what we want, which is, how do we reestablish that relationship at CBS Evening News, which, and I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm guessing they're not what they once were, to where we have a relationship now with our user and our viewer again. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I think, so the evening news of any of the 3 broadcasts are ranging still every night between 7 to 9 million people. Collectively, you're still looking at a nightly audience between ABC, NBC, and CBS of 21 million viewers. 60 Minutes on a Sunday on a very good night is 22 million viewers. On a bad night, still 13 million viewers. So I still think there's a hunger for news in that way and in that format and in that platform. And in regard to the relationship of your viewers, I just think that people are more interested in now than ever, I have found, I believe. And where I sit at 60 Minutes, we're in a very special place. We do have a very large audience, which I think makes the stakes a bit higher They expect something different. I look at news in terms of Sunday. Every Sunday, if a news story breaks on a Monday, I now need to watch all of the armchair journalism throughout the week on the CNNs and the Fox Newses and the MSNBC and weed out from that what is actual truth and what is fodder and what is just conversation, hoping that people rely on the staple of news that at Sunday at 7 o'clock, we're going to tell you something different. And so that's how I personally try and gain the trust of viewers and people who are seeking something out, of all of the noise and all of the talk that you hear around any given topic, that when they finally do decide to tune in either to the evening news on a given night at 6:30 or to 60 Minutes at 7 o'clock, that they know that they're going to get something they hadn't heard before. Is that it's harder and harder to achieve that because of the way and the method people do get their news. But our hope is that we're giving them something that they didn't already know, something that makes them go, God, I didn't know that. I'm so happy I chose this outlet other than reading something on any given website that they came up. Because what we did was we spoke to somebody on the ground. We got information that wasn't streaming, and we got something due to just great reporting. And I still think, hopefully, that great reporting can't be replaced by Google searches and feeds on your Facebook page.
Nicole Young from CBS News. Thank you.
Thank you
very
so much for having me.